Demographics is very important, and one of the reasons it's very important is because it actually gives us the insight into the kind of people, or the type of people, or the age group of the people, and basically the entire demographics of a suburb, and that actually helps us in a lot of decision making. And I'll give you an example. For example, if you look at population, and I'm just going to keep expanding this because one thing will lead to another. If you just look at population, that data will tell you whether or not the population increased or decreased, and whatever happened, why did it happen. So you got to find out the reasons why the population increased or decreased, because that might give you an insight into something else. For example, did people migrate out or did people migrate in? If people migrated out, why did they move out of that suburb or that area? Or if they moved in, why did they move in that suburb? Is there something happening in the suburb? What actually prompted them to move to that suburb? So all those things. So you got to. So there's a why behind every behind every step that we move on to. Is there a trend developing? Do you find that people from one place usually move into another place? For example, a lot of people downsize, and when they downsize, they are actually downsizing in from a place that's a little bit more expensive, and they're actually downsizing and then moving on to a place which is less expensive, and that gives us a bit of cash. So what does that tell me? That tells me that they are cashed up after downsizing. And what does that tell me? Well, that tells me that I could very well be able to get a better price for what I'm developing if it suits them. And their age group would then determine the design of the building or the townhouse that you intend on building. I'll give you an example. A lot of people in Victoria, in Melbourne, started downsizing in suburbs like Caulfield, and then started moving on to Chelsea and further back. Now they wanted some lifestyle, and Caulfield didn't offer that anymore. But the land in Caulfield was much more expensive, so they sold that off and they started moving on to other Bayside suburbs. Income group. It will give you an insight into what sort of income group lives in that area. Why? Because we want to find out what can they afford. If you build a mansion in a house where the average household income is only $4,000 a month, no one's going to buy that, because that you've actually built something that doesn't fit the market. So you got to be aware of that. It also talks about the average income in dollar terms, the average age, so what kind of people are living. Is it young families living there, or they're single couples, singles living there, or they're young couples living there, or they are people, mostly of them are retirees. Who is actually living in that area? Vehicles per household also tell you about the kind of disposable income that people have. Another thing that you can find out from this data is whether or not this is more owner occupied or renter occupied. If it's more owner occupied area, the rental yield is actually going to be comparatively low, because people spend more on houses where they actually live in themselves rather than on an investment property. So investment property is always pure math, and they look at it and they look at the numbers and they say, okay, this gives me a better return, and I'll explain that to you. That's how the investment side of it works. However, if you're an owner, if you're developing in an area that is more owner occupied, you're gonna be very careful, because a lot of people would want to want to buy something more expensive, and that might not suit the kind of development that you are doing. Renter occupied, basically more people on rent means more investors own the property in that area, and it's your job to actually find out why is that happening there.